Good afternoon, my name is Paul Monk. We've made this video because regrettably I've been unable to join you in Washington DC for this forum. What I'd like to do is step you through why we've done this project at all, by way of welcoming you and setting the stage for what I believe will be 2 hours of quite fascinating presentation and discussion. How we had an interest in the Hollis case. I would love to be there to field exactly why you were interested, but let me explain why I think it's intrinsically important. The first and most fundamental is that counterintelligence and security are at least as important now as they've ever been. And the study of the controversy, let's say, about Roger Hollis is a great case study in counterintelligence and reasoning. So wherever you end up coming down on the Hollis case, the reasoning through which you step in order to reach a clear and accountable verdict is well worth doing. If you're a graduate student, it's a case study that you would benefit from thinking through very carefully and clearly. The second reasoning is that it seems to me that the Hollis case is in fact a fascinating cold case. Some years ago, I read a book by Stacey Horn called The Restless Sleep about the New York Police Department Cold Case Squad and their efforts to solve what are actually thousands of unsolved murders in New York City alone. It's forensically very interesting, it's intrinsically very interesting, and I want to suggest that the Hollis case is a cold case of just that kind. We'll explore in the second of these video clips why I believe it's a cold case and not a solved case. But right now I want to suggest that if for the moment we assume that the question of who was the GRU mole in MI5 is unsolved, then we ought all, as professionals with an interest in counterintelligence, have an interest in looking at it and seeing it solved. So that's the second reason. The third and most fundamental is that 4 years ago, when the Authorised History of MI5 by Christopher Andrew was published, he made clear in press interviews that he believed one of the great contributions of his authorised history was finally to have laid to rest this controversy about Hollis and to have shown that he was not a Soviet mole. I bought his book wanting to find out how he'd done it, quite open to the idea that in fact he had. And I was astonished at the way he handled the case. I wrote a review of it, which some of you I believe have read, in which I made clear that unless I was missing something very fundamental, he certainly had not laid the ghost to rest. On the contrary, he'd made an untenable claim about who really was the Soviet mole in MI5, and he had made no attempt at all to address the serious accusations made against Roger Hollis as far back as the 1960s. So what we've attempted in this project is to lay out as clearly as we can the fundamental indictment of Hollis so that it can be more clearly considered. And should it prove the case that Christopher Andrew or anybody else could show explicitly where that indictment is flawed, that would be all to the good. As far as we're aware, nobody has attempted to do that so far, and that's what makes this forum original and I believe worthwhile. Now, the way we've approached this is to use a technique which my company pioneered some years ago called argument mapping. You have in front of you, I understand, a set of argument maps taken from the report. What I want to begin by doing is explaining how an argument map actually works. To some of you it may seem intuitively evident, but it's going to be worthwhile for us collectively to have a shared understanding. What an argument map endeavours to do is to take reasoning that is customarily laid out in a linear fashion in prose and put it into a hierarchically structured diagram so that the inferential steps, the nature and place of the evidence, the work that each particular claim is doing, is very clear. We use line and colour and position to throw into high relief what is often obscured by linear prose. And we take reading argument in prose so much for granted and the work that it leaves us to do that we often fail to realise that a lot of that work is hard work that can be alleviated by visual diagramming. So my company set out to devise a technique that would actually make it easier to see what's going on in an argument and consequently to have a shared understanding of what is at stake in an argument and to be able literally to point to where the key considerations are and focus debate on those points. Let me explain therefore, beginning with the simplest possible kind of argument map, exactly how it works. What you can see on the screen now is an old simple inference that even Aristotle used to use to explain elementary inferences. It's often dubbed old mortality. And as you can see, the contention is that Socrates is mortal. Now the question is, when you move to the next level down, those green squares are the argument in support of that contention. And notice that the argument in this case has two component parts. One is the major premise and one is the minor premise. And the major premise is, well, we know that Socrates is mortal because Socrates was human. Now, very frequently in an argument, that or others, often more complicated ones, the second premise, the minor premise, won't even be spelled out because it seems obvious. Why would we assume that being human, Socrates is mortal? Well, the minor premise makes it explicit because all humans are mortal. Now, here's the thing to get. For the contention to be true, both the major and minor premises must be true. If you disagree with the claim that Socrates is mortal, it will be because you think that either he wasn't human, or yes, he was human, but not all humans are mortal. Now, in that particular case, I'd be very surprised if anybody present would want to take issue with the argument, but the important thing is to see the argument structure. What I want to do now is move from that very simple elementary illustration of how the diagramming makes it clear to a slightly more elaborate and certainly more controversial argument map. What you'll see on your screen now is an argument that actually, if you look at the contention box, Bibi Netanyahu recently was right to go before the US Congress at the invitation of John Boehner and claim that the Obama administration was on the wrong track with its negotiations with Iran about nuclear weapons. Now, there will almost certainly in this room be people on both sides of that debate, or people who are uncertain about it. And the objective of an argument map is not in the first instance to prove one way or another whether that contention is true, but to lay out as clearly as possible what are the considerations which would have us decide one way or another, and ultimately converge in agreement, I trust, one way or another, as to whether it's true. And what you'll see is that at the first level down, the fundamental consideration is that the Obama administration's approach, if followed, poses a serious security threat to Israel. Now, we can agree or disagree about that, but notice, as with the Socrates case, that it's the assumption going with it that is crucial to this. Assume for a moment that that claim is true. It is still open to contention whether that made it right for Bibi Netanyahu to do what he did. And at the next level down, therefore, you get reasons and objections around those two core claims. Now, for the moment, you can see I've sketched in a number of considerations. I won't step through every one, you can all see them. The important thing is this: different people in this audience, in any audience, will immediately want to say, well, wait a minute, I agree with this, or I disagree with that, or you've omitted this consideration, or I would word that a little differently, or there's an objection to this. And if we're mapping, if this is a facilitated workshop, what we do is we slowly harvest those considerations, we plug them in precisely where they belong in the map, and gradually what emerges is a clear, shared understanding of what this debate's really about. And when you've got that shared understanding of what's going on, you're then in a position to take the next step. And we always advise in workshops that people withhold their strong inclination to leap to a conclusion, to an evaluation, until you've got that argument clear and cold. But that next step is, as we say, an evaluation of the map. And notice now that these different claims have a tick or a cross in them. Now, you may again look at this and say, wait a minute, you're now telling us that it's true that he was right. No, what I'm saying is that one evaluation, based on the evaluations of the underpinning reasoning, is that he's right. If you think that's actually not the case, it will be because something's missing, which we can then plug in, or that the evaluation of one of these claims is a misevaluation. That, for example, the objection, which is here overruled on the basis that its minor premise is incorrect, is actually a sound objection. And if that's the case, we can probably agree that this is important. Zero in on it and look very closely at whether or not that assumption is warranted. That's what argumentation at its best is really all about. That's the method we've set out in this report to apply to the Hollis case. Now here's the final and crucial consideration. What you have in the report, what you have in these maps, is the case for the prosecution. Why is that? So far there is not a systematic case for the defence. I'll revisit that proposition in just a moment. What there is, however, in the work of Chapman Pincher, is a pretty systematic attempt at the case for the prosecution. And what we've endeavoured to do is to lay out as clearly as possible, saving you a great deal of work if you were to plough through these very big books he's written, to say this fundamentally is what he's arguing. And once we have that clear, we're able to go back to those who are sceptical, to those who believe Hollis was innocent, to the authorised historian, and say, we know you don't believe this. What we're asking is, where exactly is Pinchot wrong? Where exactly is the flaw in this argument? And all we want to accomplish in today's 2-hour forum is to step through this with you so that you can all go away saying, I now understand clearly what the case for the prosecution is. And probably with a list of questions, we'd say, well, if I'm to become convinced that in fact Hollis was a Soviet mole, then I need to cross-check, or I think somebody needs to cross-check, a specific set of claims. I think you'll find that many of the claims that are made are almost certainly true, if for no other reason than even the authorised historian doesn't disagree. The crucial question is, what are the important questions concerning which there might still be controversy, and how readily can we check them out? That we see as the next step beyond the forum, and we want to encourage anybody present, graduate students, intelligence professionals, academics, to say, that's interesting enough that I want to see it done. And if at the end of today we have got that shared understanding and that set of questions, this forum will have been thoroughly worthwhile.